Before I introduce our next speaker, Bill Hippie Woolf, I'd like to mention our sponsor, co-host, and partner today, the Space Force Association, which Bill is the president and executive director of. The Space Force Association provides research, analysis, and expertise to inform U.S. space operations, policy, strategy, and operations decisions. The SFA is unique in its focus on U.S. space operations and pursues 3 focus areas to contribute to continued U.S. superiority in the space domain: philanthropy, research, and network. Bill Hippie Woolf is a retired Air Force colonel and president and executive director of the Space Force Association. Colonel Woolf served over 24 years in the Air Force, retiring in 2018. He's a career space and nuclear officer in high impact operations, staff leadership, and technical program management positions with peerless depth and breadth of experience in advanced space programs and joint all domain command and control. Again, thank you, Bill. We are excited to partner with you as we move ahead with our shared vision of a free and fair space for all. Please welcome Bill Woolf.
Hello, Lila. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I really do appreciate it. And thanks so much to Foundation for the Future and Blue Marble Week for putting on these events, because that's really what it's about. It's just getting the word out about what's going on in the space domain. You know, Michael, I love the way you separated that out. The AC/DC mnemonic is great because it does require a complete network to bring all these different capabilities together. As Michael mentioned, I'm going to focus on the defense aspect of that just briefly, but before I do, I want to say what a great event that you all are putting on. I mean, if you just look at the speakers for today, you've got Emily Whitman, you've got Lee Steinke, I'm looking forward to that one, Lance Bush, and Emily Calandrelli, to focus on the future and what the future holds for our space professionals, in the military, civil, academic perspective. And then tomorrow is going to be another great day, and SFA is very proud to bring some great speakers about contextualizing what it means as we get into the cislunar environment. And when I say we, I say really the world gets into the cislunar environment and what the impacts are going to be. So tomorrow you've got Rob Adams. I'm really looking forward to Rob's talk about advanced propulsion technologies. And then Eric Sunby is going to be speaking about future innovations and rocket cargo point-to-point space transport from Lieutenant Colonel Rob Ladd. I think is going to be very interesting. And it follows up to the discussion we had last month with Michael about space launch and the importance of space launch. And then Namrati Goswami, of course, is going to speak. Looking forward to that. And then Casey Durad from New Space, New Mexico. And then we're bringing in some speakers. We've got Dr. Mike Lewds Martindale, who is our director of the Space Education Committee for the Space Force Association. He's going to be talking about the importance of wargaming and how we conceptualize potential impacts to the U.S. space superiority mission through these tabletop exercises and what we can glean from that. Floyd Kerr goes by Shock. He's going to talk about K4 active defense and red space, because really when we start talking about the defense of our critical space assets, it is about what the adversary could potentially do. And if we don't understand what the impacts to our space superiority mission are, that's where it comes in, and we have to quantify what those potential impacts are. And Floyd's going to talk about that. And then Trey York is going to be talking about blue versus brown water. And we've heard a lot of discussion about this, and Trey will provide his perspective. And then Joshua Carlson, author and program manager in the United States Air Force, is going to be speaking. And then really looking forward to General Saltzman's talk tomorrow afternoon, who's the Chief Operating Officer for the United States Space Force. So just wanted to provide a quick overview and really thank you all for putting together a phenomenal agenda, and looking forward to the next couple of days. And thanks for having the Space Force Association. The Space Force Association When we stood this up back in 2019, a month before the Space Force stood up, I was looking across the professional organizations and I couldn't find one that was focused on advocating for and educating folks about the United States Space Force and the criticality that the Space Force organization provides to our national defense. And there was no membership-based organization. So we stood this up kind of with the intent of giving the space warfighter a voice and advocating for the space warfighter. Now, I know there's plenty of folks out there that will say, wait a second, is space warfighting domain? And the fact is, it is a warfighting domain. And because it's a warfighting domain, you have to allow space professionals, space guardians, to think like warfighters. Now, that's to say that they need to be prepared for a fight in space, but nobody wants a fight in space. No, we don't want to have a war in space. However, if we are in a position, if the U.S. is in a position to defend its assets in space, it should have the ability to do that, just like any other domain that we provide critical capabilities. And we'll talk about those 5 domains here throughout the talk. And now I've got about 30 to 45 minutes to have a discussion with you about how to continue to develop the space warfighter. And so if there's any questions, Michael, don't hesitate to interrupt, and I'll be happy to answer those questions as they come up. But let me see here if I can share my screen. So now we're getting into the technological challenges. And I said, so this is the title of this talk is Concepts for Space Warfighter Development. But the fact is, we have been conducting operations in space from a military perspective for a long time. So it's really continued development under this new paradigm shift of going from the Air Force service to the Space Force and the stand up of the brand new service. And that is what the Space Force is doing to help continue developing the space warfighter. But to put it in context, what I'd like to do is just go through some other domains. And I suspect people will recognize these warfighters as I scroll through some of these pictures. And I'd like to use that as a stage setter to say, hey, this is kind of the same type of folks we have to create, but how do we create them? So as I scroll down here, and everyone probably recognizes this picture. This is a tip of the hat to our maritime domain warfighters. And this is a group of Navy SEALs that are about to conduct a very specific mission. But the fact is, how were these warfighters created? How many documentaries do we have on SEAL training and the type of training the SEALs go through for 2+ years to become experts in their field so they can go prosecute a specific mission in support of that domain superiority. In the case of the SEALs, as you know, it's a maritime domain and it's typically from a surface or subsurface level to a land domain. So it's a transition from the maritime domain to the land domain. In this case, they're going to be supporting the maritime superiority mission and probably contributing to the land domain superiority mission. And they went through some very specific training, and it took a long time for them to develop their expertise. And not only that, but then it becomes a career. Now, this is just an example from the maritime domain for very specific capability. In this case, it's the SEALs, but realize in the Navy, you've got surface ships, you have subsurface ships, you've got carriers, you've got command and control ships. And so this is just one branch of the expertise that's needed to be developed in the maritime domain to accomplish maritime superiority. And it probably takes a second for these pictures to load. This is a pretty easy warfighter to spot. You see the tabs, Special Forces, Ranger, Airborne, and then the Special Forces group that this individual's with. This is another example of a land domain warfighter, and they went again through years of training to become an expert in their field. In this case, they first went through Airborne School, then through Ranger School, and then went through Special Forces School, which is again a tremendous pipeline similar to the Navy SEALs. But the fact is, this is a land domain asset that's supporting a larger, broader land domain mission. And I know the talk for today is space strategy, but unless we start at this very lowest level to define and quantify what those capabilities are that our space and multi-domain professionals need to accomplish their task of domain superiority, then it's going to be difficult to inform the strategy by which we acquire those capabilities. This is a shout out to my Air Force heritage. And you've got a couple of F-16s and an F-16 pilot here. This is what we would call a air warfighter. And this fighter pilot would say, that's exactly what I am. I am a air warfighter, and my job is to conduct a specific mission in support of air superiority for the air domain. And again, you look at the type of training that this person had to go through to fly that jet. And then what was really interesting about this, and for all the examples that we're walking through from a domain superiority capability perspective, is all of these experts inform the acquisition cycle. So when something doesn't work, or they don't have the ability to conduct a specific operation, guess what they do? They turn around to industry and say, hey, if I don't have this capability, I can't prosecute my mission. And so that's that relationship that has to be developed between the warfighter, in this case, the space warfighter, and the acquisition community to inform industry so that we can quickly get to and close the gaps on the capability gaps that we've got for space superiority, similar to what these warfighters do on a day-to-day basis. And the space warfighter. I've got the mug. It's right here. So if you want to get a mug, you can get mugs made up. But this is a concept just to get some folks talking about what it means. And last month, I remember we spoke just a little bit about an interview that SFA conducted with General Burt last year, who was the chief operations officer at the time as the transition happened between Air Force Space Command and the stand-up of the Space Operations Command. And she brought up the point about Lewis and Clark. And the fact is, Lewis and Clark had to settle the West. And as they discovered the West, they had to set up settlements along the route. And those settlements were there to protect America's interests as it continued to develop the West and discover the West. And so she used that analogy as we continue to move into the cislunar environment. What do we have, or what are going to be the defense requirements to set up and protect our outposts as we continue to move into space, as just an example. And so this picture just highlights the fact that at some point, we're going to have to think about what that means so that we don't have pirates in space, or that we can protect American interests in space. This is probably long-term, but it's not too far-fetched based on current strategies that industry is doing, such as SpaceX, to put people into space as quickly as possible. So what does a space warfighter need? And I put this up as just a concept image, but the fact is, and really what the space warfighter does is they sit on console and they look at information and they look at data. And this is just an example because it's so much easier to go to Google and type in a space warfighter and get this image from NASA than it is to go on and try to get an actual image of a military guardian sitting on console. But the fact is they're there. And this is a typical setup for a space operator. So it's just a bunch of data coming in. Now, I suspect Jessica here, as an example, had to go through a lot of training to understand what all of these input of data means so that she can prosecute her mission in support of the ISS. Now, if you're looking at this, and if you're looking at it from another domain as a warfighter, is this intuitive? Can you sense of this as quickly as possible? And then when a problem presents itself, you see a little red right here on the screen. When a problem presents itself, how quickly and what authorities does Jessica have to actually change the environment to ensure that she can continue to carry out her mission of protecting the ISS. And this is, again, an example, but it's one that's an important point to bring up because that's really what all of these operators have in common. They've been given the authority and the autonomy to execute a very specific mission based on strategic and tactical rules of engagement. Strategic, obviously, from the National Security Council, but tactical in that they've been trained to operate a specific system to conduct their operations. And so what is the space weapon system? Before we get into that, the Joint Pub 3.14 just came out last October. And this is the first time the joint doctrine is changed based on after the new services stood up. So Joint Pub 3.14. And what Joint Pub 3.14 identifies is not space superiority like they do with the other domains, and they talk about mission superiority, but they talk about space mission assurance and what that means. That means that there are three primary points that the joint doctrine brings up. And I know everyone loves talking about joint doctrine, but it's an important point, an important place to start as to start to demonstrate what the Defense Department is thinking about from a space superiority perspective. So as you can see, the primary focus is defensive operations. So how do we reconstitute and how do we ensure that we have defenses in place to provide alerts and ensure that we continue to provide those critical capabilities in support of the space mission? If defensive operations don't work, there's reconstitution. So we talked about this a little bit last month during Blue Marble Week, is how quickly can we reconstitute an architecture if it's been degraded based on an adversary attack? And then resilience. How can we continue to provide that capability based on the adversary getting to have a vote in the operations? So how resilient is that capability going to continue to provide based on adversary moves in the space domain? So that's really, and you can look at it, it's a 90-page document, it's online. Anyone can go and look at Joint Pub 3.14 to look at what the Space Force is thinking about from a doctrinal perspective. And so between the two, if you look at joint doctrine versus domain doctrine, joint doctrine always takes precedence over domain doctrine. So in the future, as these space warfighters continue to develop, the expectation is that these guardians and warfighters will continue to evolve this doctrine. And if you want, you can look at the Space Warfighter Doctrine that came out last year, the capstone document. We conducted an interview with General Corey, and you can go to our YouTube channel and look at really what they're thinking about as they continue to develop this culture in the Space Force. The other aspect you have to bring up whenever you talk about space mission assurance is organizational structure. And so a lot of people just don't understand how the Space Force is organized. The fact is the Space Force has three field commands, and it's going to have three field commands stood up by the end of this year. It's Space Operations Command that conduct day-to-day operations for the Space Force and contribute and provide those capabilities to the Joint Warfighter every single day. So Space Operations Command organizes, trains, and equips forces to present to U.S. Spacecom to conduct the space superiority mission. Space Training and Readiness Command, STARCOM, that'll stand up here later this year as well. And it's going to be responsible for putting together and bringing together the training environment necessary to ensure that these space warfighters are trained and the ranges necessary to test out some of these capabilities, and then the tactics, techniques, and procedures organizations to actually start to document these best practices. And I bring up the word stratopractical. And so whenever you start to talk about space, it's really difficult to separate the lines between what's tactical, what is the tactical space person actually doing, versus the operational, which is the command and control structure that allows that tactician to do their job, versus the strategic nature that is provided by the military leaders assigned to those specific missions, and then even the policymakers that allow those decision makers to make the decisions to ensure the domain superiority responsibility that they're in charge of. So I bring that up because the Space Force is still working on what that looks like and what authorities the tactician has and the training necessary to ensure that they've got the capabilities to do their job. I mean, they're doing their job today and they're doing it wonderfully. They're just still working on the development of what the different aspects are so that the rules of engagement are understood. And we're going to talk more about that tomorrow. So potential definition for the space warfighter. You can read that there, but it's a professional focused on excellence in the space domain. And when we start talking about excellence in the space domain, I suspect what that means is you're going to have to spend a lot of time understanding your specific system in your domain so that you can focus your efforts and possess the joint acumen. And that means what are the other capabilities and other domains providing? Because when you talk about a space threat, the response to a space threat is not necessarily going to be a space capability. The response to a space threat could be the utilization of other domains to cover down on that threat to that space capability. So it's inherently multi-domain. So you've got to have the excellence, you got to have the joint acumen, and you have to be able to confront space problems with a multi-domain, multi-dimensional solution. That presents multiple dilemmas at a speed which an adversary cannot adapt. And that really goes into domain superiority, but this is a kind of a concept definition to start talking about what the space tactician is going to need to accomplish their specific tasks. And I talk about multi-domain. And this is just a very simple, Michael, you know I like to put up charts. So this is just a very simple chart that talks about the criticality and really the concept. And if you want, let me see if I can't do this, Michael. This is kind of risky on my part. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you think this is a good or bad idea, but I want to try to show a YouTube video. What do you think? All right, I'm going to give this a try.
So it's good, but sound usually doesn't go through. So video sometimes does, but sound doesn't always. So be prepared to like cut that if the sound's
all right.
I'll let you know.
Okay, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down if you don't hear the sound. This video is I think it's a great concept about multi-domain and what multi-domain means.
We got sound.
Radar has detected an unknown aircraft approaching friendly airspace Alpha Zulu Foxtrot, requesting eyes on our assets.
Unknown aircraft confirmed. Infrared indicates possible ground movement with associated enemy radar emissions. Working to pinpoint exact coordinates.
AWACS continuing to monitor the situation, sending information to ground command and control.
Deploying Bravo Company to intercept.
Cyber intrusion has been auto-detected, thwarted, and the counter-cyber response options are queued up and ready for approval.
We have potential locations for adversary mobile SAMs. Transmitting image for analysis. Precise coordinates identified. Sending to air, ground, and naval command and control. Requesting standoff weapons.
B-52 is airborne, standing by for SAL launch.
High mobility artillery rocket system standing by.
Tomahawk land attack missile standing by. EC-130 and EA-18G in the air to
Facilitate standoff weapon ingress. Your
communications are jammed.
Cyber control has successfully infiltrated the adversary network. Command and control is degraded.
Launching F-22s and F-35s.
Surface-to-air missile launch detected. Lightning 1 request strike of active SAM.
The F-35s already took them out. Raptor 2, declare to engage.
That was awesome.
Whenever we're talking, how about that, Michael? I think that video just does a really good job of describing the type of technical prowess the all-domain expert is going to need. And in order to get to the all-domain expert, you have to start with specific domains. So that definition we just spoke about is how does the individual gain the necessary expertise in their specific system so that they can end up becoming a joint all-domain expert. And so what I've got here is just a quick chart to describe the space expertise needed. So ideally what you've got is you've got a person, a space warfighter, that is an expert in a specific system. And as they become that expert in that system, they start to realize and understand how that system impacts all the other domains. And that's where you see the Venn diagram overlapping chart would imply that this individual, the space person, is not only an expert in the system, but now they start to understand how their system interacts with air, cyberspace, sea, and land. And this is just a timeline. If we were to develop a timeline, the arrow would go in towards the center, where as you become, as you continue on in your career, you become more of a multi-domain expert because of your expertise in a specific domain. So I just want to put out there that space, because of space, and really underlying all these domains, is you've got the electromagnetic spectrum, which ties all these capabilities together. And so space is inherently all domain, not because of the expertise, but also because the EM spectrum that ties all of these capabilities together, which means the space expert has to now start to, understand how their space piece, their space capability fits into the larger all domain fight. So how do we get there? And this is something that is, again, the Space Force is doing a phenomenal job, and they're standing up the Space Training and Readiness Command here probably in the next few months. And again, what they're going to be focused on is advanced training. So you saw those pictures probably from training events of those individuals at the beginning of the discussion. And the fact is, we need to have those advanced training events, not just for in-domain expertise development, where the space folks get to fight in that domain and understand what the impacts are, but also to interact with the other domains. And so Red Flag is an example of a large force employment exercise where folks get together and really try to understand the air superiority mission. And so space folks show up to Red Flag exercises to integrate those critical capabilities. That's an example of advanced training. And that just needs to continue across all domains and figure out what exercises at that tactical level are going to allow folks to demonstrate the force packaging capability that we know we need to ensure the space superiority mission is accomplished, but also the all domain superiority mission is accomplished, because you can't have one without the other. How do you document these best practices? Tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs. And so what we have to do is quantify, again, what those capabilities are, and then how to utilize those capabilities. And if it can be a non-material solution, then it should be documented in a TTP. If it's a material solution, that spins up the acquisition process to ensure that we have the right capabilities to fill those gaps in the space superiority mission. We have to have a realistic training environment. You got to have a space test and training range that is fully vetted and funded to ensure that these Guardians have the ability to go and conduct their warfighting mission on a range that's safe, so that we don't any of our own capabilities through training. And of course, the agile acquisition discussion that's ongoing and the partnership with industry is being established in a roadmap that was mentioned by Space Force leadership, General Saltzman, just last week, I believe, picked up by Politico, and he was talking, actually it was in Defense News, and he was talking about the Space Warfare Analytics Center, or Space Warfare Analysis Center. And what I would assume this means, and probably some of the concepts that they're talking about, is quantifying how to demonstrate the criticality of the space domain to the other domains. And when those are lost, when those critical capabilities are lost, how do you prioritize the reconstitution of specific capabilities and ensure that a resilient architecture supports the global mission of space superiority? And that really gets to how you start to quantify the space mission assurance mission, which is, what do we need day to day to accomplish space superiority? How many satellites do we need? How many transponders on specific satellites for critical communications infrastructure? how much navigation capability do we need from GPS and or other satellite constellations that are up there? And can those be provided by our other domains as effectively as the space domain? And so these are the discussions that need to continue to be fostered as we continue to develop out the space warfighter in support of the Space Force. I'd just like to, again, throw this slide up there just to provide some context to what's happening in the Force and what they're doing to ensure that they've got the infrastructure to support the continued development of the space warfighter. We talked about Space Operations Command and STARCOM. And then where this agile acquisition process comes in is Space Systems Command. And so Space Systems Command very closely with SPOC and STARCOM to ensure that those critical capabilities are provided to those space warfighters so that we never have to have a day without space, which is a study that was conducted by the Air Force years ago. And we just can't have that. But I'm going to go ahead and pause here for questions. I'll stop sharing the screen unless, Michael, you want to go back to any specific slides.
No, let's kind of just have a bit of a conversation. I do have some questions, and I want to I want to kind of just chat about SFA. I want to chat about the Space Force itself as as an organization. I've got some questions from the audience, so we're going to get into that. I think the first thing I want to talk about is one of your earliest slides. I don't think we need to pull it back up. Everybody was paying attention, but that first image where you had, a special SEAL team, right? People really understand what a SEAL team does, right? Even if you're not a part of the military. And for those folks that don't know me, I'm a former U.S. Marine. I did 4 years enlisted. I never had any of the specialized training that these folks did, so good for them for doing that. But I think in general, people have a pretty good handle on what it means to be in the Army, in the Navy, even the Air Force. I think everybody understands what it takes to be in the Coast Guard, right? Those are fairly well understood and fairly well internalized ideas of what those things mean. But Space Force, I'm going to say it, sir, it's a damn mystery to people. So I want to just kind of unpack it. Like I want to do a compare contrast between what we know about the SEAL team as a great example, and then what we don't know, showing the video that you just posted, right? Because I think a lot of folks don't really understand that the SEAL team needs those folks at those consoles in order to do their job. So just kind of like link those two for us a little bit.
You bet. So yeah, the video I think demonstrates really succinctly the fact that you've got folks on console doing a specific job. Now that video, understand, it's not reality. It's a concept video that was put together to demonstrate what could be done eventually. And so without that tool for that space operator to provide that information, that specific data to that SEAL team through their C2 structures, you don't know what the impact to that mission could be. So let's just play that for a second, play that out for a second. The SEAL team shows up. They don't have their critical SATCOM support. They don't have GPS support. And now all of a sudden, how do they know that they don't have those capabilities? And how quickly can we get those capabilities back? And what's going to be the impact to that mission for that SEAL team when they show up on that shore without those capabilities? They're going to resort to older technology that they may or may not have with them at the time. And that mission could be a mission abort. And so the easy thing to do, and let me just pull the thread on that a little bit, is there's movies And so we can watch movies. There's movies made about every other domain. And it's very well understood because we've had to fight in every single one of those domains. We don't want to have to fight in the space domain. And so we don't want to see movies made about the space fights that are or aren't happening. But the fact is, in the other domains, they've had to fight, so movies are made. And not only that, technology is developed because we have experts on those capabilities that continue to inform that acquisition process. But that is to say, the movies that have been made are interesting, but I suspect there's an opportunity to make a space movie that is representative of the operations that take place in the space domain and how critical they are. If you take that 1.5-minute video that we just showed and expand that out into 60 minutes, I suspect people are going to understand it a lot more. And that gets to the declassification issue. You know, General Hyten said it in an interview a couple of weeks ago as a vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He says, we've got a classification issue. And so until we can start to declassify some of these technologies, and that is not to say that we don't have exercises that exist. For example, Space Flag was stood up to allow space tacticians to demonstrate capabilities and fight through a thinking adversary. But you as the American people, we can't see the outbrief of Space Flag. Right. But that would be an opportunity to demonstrate this is how we are conducting operations in the tactical space and how we're informing the operational and strategic levels of space. And here's the exercise outbrief that took place. And here's the lessons we learned from that specific engagement.
So I think that would be great, but I think we're also dealing with history and legacy, right? My mom was in the Army. My dad was in the Army for 33 years. My aunts, uncles, cousins, both grandfathers were in World War II, right? Most people have somebody that they can point to as an example for what it means to be a jarhead, to be a sailor. One of the things we're dealing with is that this is really new, right? There has been an Air Force Space Command for quite a while, and there are other components. Each of the services use satellite data in a different way, but no one labeled themselves as a guardian, right? So guardian's a new term. It's not well understood. There's definitely some I would say public relations problems with the naming of Guardian and the logo. There's a lot of folks that don't understand that those things have heritage that predates the comic books, that predates the television shows, that predates, like, you know, these things have heritage, but it's not very well known heritage. So I think people don't really understand what Space Force is about, or even to the extent of they don't understand why it exists. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, talk about its history, talk about its heritage, talk about the point of it in a really simple way that people get it. Nobody's gotten that. So it kind of feels like a Mission Impossible request, but if you take a stab at it.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Michael. No small feat, of course.
No small feat. If you can do it, like, that would be great. But so far, no way has. But history, heritage, and what this thing is for. Sure.
So just historically, let's do a compare to the last service that stood up, and we talk about this on a regular basis. The Air Force had to fight through a Second World War to gain that heritage and that history, and then quantify how important air superiority was to the joint fight in order to demonstrate the capability to launch a separate service. Mm-hmm. We don't want to go through a World War II. We don't want to have what we would call a Pearl Harbor in space. And that's what folks talk about on a regular basis is, what if? And the what if is becoming a reality, and became a reality in 2007.
Wait, Bill. A Pearl Harbor in space would be a sneak attack that destroys many or much of our satellite capabilities. And if you did that, then you lose GPS, your cell phone doesn't work as well, your credit card definitely doesn't work. That's what people mean by Pearl Harbor in space, right?
That's right, a surprise attack on our critical infrastructure. Now, it's funny you bring up the points about GPS and credit card not working and ATMs not working, and that's really the example we always have to go to, because we haven't demonstrated another example where you say, hey, if we lose space capabilities, these 10 missions across other domains can't do their job. And so until you are able to have that conversation to say, you took out these capabilities in space in these various orbital regimes, and the impact on my operations are X. But right now, that's the problem people are having, is they can't see it.
Right.
I mean, satellites don't have moms. And so it doesn't become as important because, well, they're just doing their job, and we assume it's going to be fine. But what we haven't had to do, thank God, is say that we can't do our job because we haven't gained and maintained space superiority. So it's not been demonstrated to that level. And therefore, it's hard for people to justify the expenditure for standing up a new service. Now, because we've stood up a new service and because it's done, now what we can do is focus singularly on the space domain mission. You know, in the past, the space mission was subordinate to the Air Force mission. And ultimately, what that means is the focus for the Air Force is going to be maintaining air superiority. It's going to be difficult to focus on the space superiority mission when your focus should be on the air superiority mission. So that's why they had to stand up a brand new service to focus specifically on the space superiority mission. And now, from an acquisition, training, delivery of capabilities to the joint fight and really the coalition fight can be provided through that service component that is focused on the space superiority mission, which, to your point, you know, gives us the critical communication satellites, the GPS satellites, the OPIR satellites that provide our missile warning and infrared detection across the globe, to all of that infrastructure necessary to ensure that happens.
Cool. All right, so we got some questions from the audience. The fastest, easiest one is Dr. Rob Adams says that he missed the quote about Lewis and Clark. Can you just kind of repeat that, give some context, and then maybe elaborate on it?
Yeah.
I know that Rob is working on some stuff that's pretty relevant to that. So go a little bit deeper into that.
Okay, you got it. It's funny. Well, it's not funny. The book is Undaunted Courage, and it's about the story of Lewis and Clark moving west and what they had to go through. And in that book, it describes the fact is you have to set up forts to protect America's interests as it moved into a completely unknown territory. And so, in an interview with General Burt last spring, when she was the Chief Operations Officer for Space Command and then transitioned it to Space Operations Command, she brought up that analogy to talk about what the Space Force is going to have to think about in terms of protecting not just our interests, U.S. interests in space and the cislunar environment, but our international partners and coalition as well. And so that's what she said is they've got to work through that. So the Space Force is thinking about ways to ensure our interests are protected in that environment. And that we're going to be doing another interview with General Burt here at the end of February. So stay tuned for that, because we will continue to pull the thread on what that means and what the Space Force is thinking about and what U.S. Space Com is thinking about, because her new role is not just Space Operations Command West, working for General Whiting, but she's also the Combined Forces Space Component Commander under U.S. Space Com. And so that is a very interesting dual-hatted position that allows her not just to do the organized training and equip mission, but then to turn around and actually deliver those capabilities to the joint fight. So maybe a little bit more than you were looking for, Rob, but happy to follow up.
As a really personal aside, I've never read that book. I've had it recommended to me many, 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 many times. And it's not an exaggeration. This has actually been tracked to my mom and my grandmother did the family tree, but I'm actually related to Clark. He's my uncle, way, way, way back when. So it's part of our family heritage. And I've got one of the books behind me, but not this one. So I need to kind of take a look at that. I think Inara is asking a really interesting question. I have some hopes for this, but I think I know what the answer is. Getting youth into STEM fields is vital. Does the Space Force plan to launch an ROTC type program to prepare youth for space? Very specifically, a second message is, is there a scouting-like organization on the horizon? For me, I was in Sea Cadets when I was in high school. So that was a pretty good place to kind of begin and try to understand. And for me, that was a natural feeder into the Marine Corps. So I'm pretty sure I know where you're going with this next answer, but what is the developmental path starting from younger kids into college kids and then into the formal service? Do you know what that path looks like yet? I think it's still very much TBD, right?
Yeah, Michael, it is. As far as I know, you bet. There have been discussions that we've been having about how to ensure kids are excited about STEM. And back to the point about the various movies, it's real easy to have recruiting messages because of movies, and you can reference movies and say it's kind of like that based on missions that were accomplished. And we don't have those movies yet. So it's tough for folks to get excited about something they can't see and can't visualize and can't become part of the narrative. And so that's the opportunity. We're going to hear from some folks later on today, Emily Calandrelli especially, who she's taken this on, to help ensure that folks are excited about it and then provide that context. And again, the context for space operations is, as we talk about it, it's focused a little bit in the defense sector, but it's a lot in the civilian, civil and industry perspective. And so how do we take those capabilities, develop the curriculum necessary, come up with an on-ramp for that curriculum that starts at the, the grade school level and continues to foster that curriculum through developmental education at the high school level, working with our OTC detachments, and then into the college level where specific degrees are focused on space, and in the instance of the U.S. Air Force Academy, space warfighting. So they've got a space warfighting minor, but how do we, back that up another 5 years and ensure that those folks are ready to get involved in the space warfighting minor at the Air Force Academy? So in development is all I can say, and we've had the discussions, and there's more to follow on that. And I know Foundation for the Future is focusing on workforce development, and we're also focusing on workforce development because, again, as many advocacy groups as we can get to ensure STEM is in the discussion, the better.
My days in the Marine Corps started for me in high school, right? As a Sea Cadet. I cannot wait for the jokes to kind of move on, and where Sea Cadet versus Space Cadet can be a real thing, right? I think we have to get past the 1950s terminology of Space Cadet and move us kind of to the 21st century and say, all right, these are real professionals. They're doing real jobs that are really, really, really important. I want to swing back to another question. Linda was talking about, how do we, let's talk about keeping the peace as well as warfighting. Bill, you said nobody wants to do war in space. Nobody wants that. Let's talk about let's talk about the mission of peace then. Let's talk about rule of law, communication, maintenance of communication and lines of communication. Let's talk about what the mission, the peace mission of Space Force is and what it might evolve into. Some of this is conjecture. I have my own ideas of what it could evolve into.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, all these views represent my own personal views and not of the United States Space Force or any.
It's an evolving organization. Yeah,
that's right. It really comes down to what all of our DoD warfighting capabilities provide. It provides options, and you don't see Navy SEALs going and conducting missions, or at least we don't see Navy SEALs going and conducting missions on a day-to-day basis. We don't see tanks maneuvering on a day-to-day basis because we have the option to maneuver those tanks. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's a defensive posture to have an offensive capability to provide options if an adversary chooses to take action against that critical capability. And so that's really what all of this is. And the profession of peace is constant across the DoD. We don't want day-to-day war regularly, let alone a war in space. And so the same thing applies is we have to train these professionals to have the options to conduct specific operations, not to be conducting those operations on a day-to-day basis. It's definitely, I don't think the administration will have I think the continue for defensive positioning will be there, and it won't be a first strike capability at all in any domain. But that's just my perspective.
Well, what about the things that we all kind of depend on, right? GPS was born out of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Projects Research Agency. That is one of the critical functions of Space Force now, is to maintain that. It is a free service the United States provides to the world. GPS doesn't live in your phone. It's not based on cell towers. That might be the most active way that you use it, but it wasn't born and bred in your phone. It's, assets in the sky. And if there was ever a peaceful domain, a peaceful use of space, I would say GPS is like the flagship. Do you have any comments on GPS or weather monitoring, weather satellites? Like, all of that is really in the Space Force's sphere of influence and control.
Yes, and as I was mentioning before, the CIFSIC commander, the Combined Forces Space Component Commander, will get briefings on a daily basis to ensure that she has what she needs to continue the space superiority mission, and she'll get status briefings on specific capabilities, and are those capabilities providing the mission that they were designed to do. What happens is, what happens when those capabilities go away? I suspect what's happening in the service is they look across the other domains to see if a resilient architecture can be provided by those other domains. And then, of course, they're looking to industry to determine what can we offload in terms of the space military capability, and can we rely on the civil sector to provide it? I know Elon Musk is talking about having a GPS capability on SpaceX. So, creating another technology that encompasses an already existing architecture just makes a lot of sense from a military to industry relationship. And so that's just a concept. I'm sure that's in discussion, but those are the types of concepts that the Space Force is going to have in the future. Is what will we be willing to leverage from the commercial sector and the civil sector to ensure the space superiority mission is accomplished?
So let's dig in a little further on that, right? That we use the words warfighting, right? And that's appropriate for, given your history and your background. Nobody talks, it's not a soundbite to say peace maintaining, right? Right, like warfighting versus peace maintaining, it's a mindset, right? It would be, I believe, this is my personal opinion, I think it would be valuable culturally to start talking about peace maintaining instead of or congruent to war fighting, right? That your mission is bigger than war fighting, right? War fighting is just one definition of your mission, and I think y'all are doing so much more than that. Hopefully warfighting is the least part of your mission going forward. Okay, we are going to start transitioning on to our next speaker. Bill, if you don't mind, post links into the chat about how people can find you, how people can get connected to the organization. Full disclosure, I am a member. I'm actually a paid member of the Space Force Association. So it's a well-spent $35 a year. So thanks for that. And really, your whole team is really kind of doing something really important. I just want to personally say thanks to your team and you for the effort kind of in hosting tomorrow and kind of bringing some just amazing folks to the table tomorrow. So thank you very much. Do you have any last thoughts? We're going to pass it over to Lila in a moment.
No, thank you so much, Michael. Again, I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to get out and talk about what I'm passionate about, which is the space mission and ensuring that people understand it a little bit better. So this opportunity, this platform is phenomenal. And what we keep getting told by Space Force leadership is just keep having the discussions, just keep allowing folks to talk about what the Space Force is and how it's extremely crucial to our national security to have the service, to do the organized training and equipping. So thanks again, Michael, and thanks for being a member. And you bet I'll post links in the chat.
Right. All right. Thanks a lot, Bill. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill, so much. Thank you again for co-hosting.